Brandon Lee, 27, was involved in a serious accident today on set. For the film The Crow, he was acting out a scene. With his feet pointed towards the camera and his head pressed against the door, young and brilliant Brandon Lee finally took a step forward. Everyone was taken aback when Brandon remained seated. "Brandon, are you okay?" was the question everyone heard the medic ask. There was complete silence throughout the building. After then, a deluge of unending conspiracy theories, cover-ups, and uncertainty ensued. For what reason was a legit bullet housed in a toy gun? Did someone forget to inspect the weapon? Additionally, why were a plethora of safety regulations disregarded? We'll explain the so-called curse and its connection to Bruce Lee's death in horrifying detail, and then we'll unveil the shocking conclusion that even the investigators were astonished by. Everything changed after the fatal scene. A simple action clip meant to set the tone for a film about brutality, determination, and stylized retribution. Thugs ambushed Brandon Lee, who was about to burst through a doorway with arms full of groceries in The Crow, playing the lead role of Eric Draven. Michael Massey would portray one of them, and he would brandish a revolver. The plan all along was for Brandon's character to plummet to his death. Everything was planned out in advance. Everyone had practiced it. The level of danger wasn't even high when compared to Hollywood gunplay. However, that night, as soon as the camera started rolling, everything fell apart. As anticipated, the scene started. Massey drew the trigger of the handgun. No one freaked out even though the gunshot was loud and unexpected. Not initially. Throughout filming, crew members had heard scores of booms just like this one. Like clockwork, Brandon slid to the floor. Massey stayed true to himself. Cut was the director's command. A round of applause ensued. It appeared for a little while that they had perfected it. Later on, it was noted that Brandon remained still. First, things were a bit unclear. Uncertainty hummed softly through the room. Is he still performing? Was there a second line he was anticipating? A voice then beckoned to him. There is no response. I freaked out in no time. Somebody hastened over. Urging for an ambulance, someone yelled out. After turning Brandon over, the crew noticed that blood was seeping through his clothing. The blood pulsating from a wound in his abdomen was genuine, not artificial. He had been shot with a legitimate weapon, not a harmless toy or blank. Everything fell apart on stage. First responders were alerted. Urged to undergo hours of emergency surgery, Brandon was whisked away to New Hanover Regional Medical Center. The bullet had ripped through too much tissue for the doctors to stop the internal bleeding, no matter how hard they tried. Brandon Lee was declared dead at 1:03 p.m. on March 31, 1993, despite all efforts. His age was 28. Upon hearing this, the entire production crew was taken aback. While set accidents sometimes occur, nothing like this ever happens. The prop gun should have been loaded with blanks so it could make noise and flash its muzzle, but it didn't fire any projectile. Still, something had fatally punctured Brandon's flesh. Tragically, there was no turning back the clock now. Michael Massey, the actor responsible for pulling the trigger, was inconsolable. He would later describe that night as the one that stripped him of his innocence, the instant the seriousness of the event dawned on him. Because she was so afraid to bring up what happened that night, Massey avoided acting for a long time. A lot of people on the set stated he never got over it. Slain Brandon Lee on set. Actor tragically passes away in shocking accident. These were the news stories that went viral around the globe. However, a deluge of unresolved inquiries lay hidden beneath it, beyond the realm of headlines. How is it possible for anything like this to occur on a professional film set? Keeping weapons secure was the responsibility of who? Why wasn't the weapon checked before the scene? What was inside that gun when it was pulled? That is the most terrifying question. The first official report was somewhat nebulous. A blank misfiring was theorized by some. The possibility of debris getting stuck in the barrel was mentioned by others. However, the results of the autopsy disproved all that was said before. Extracted from Brandon's body was a genuine .44 caliber slug. That isn't a just coincidence. In the midst of a packed crowd, it unleashes a lethal blast on a budding celebrity. Incidentally, this was not the initial occurrence of an issue on that particular set. By a wide margin, a curse was cast by the Crow. On site, rumors about the Crow's cursed status circulated even before Brandon Lee's fall. Strange accidents have beset the production from the very beginning. A carpenter was horribly burned just a few weeks into filming when some of the equipment he was using came into touch with live wires. There was a high risk of death because it was an unexpected accident. Unrelated mishaps also wounded 2 additional crew members on the same day. Even if just one day was enough to start rumors, the string of unfortunate events continued. Some of the parts of the set became stuck. Something went wrong with the machine. The outside set was partially destroyed by a storm. Actors sustained minor injuries that added up over time. People originally dismissed it with a laugh. As a joke, they began referring to it as the Crow's curse. A rising anxiety, however, lay beneath the laughing. Something seemed odd, even to the seasoned pros who had worked on dozens of shows before. After that, the evenings grew longer. Working 18-hour days and enduring terrible turnaround times nearly broke the actors and crew. Not everyone could sleep or think straight while putting in 90 to 100 hours a week. It isn't only unsustainable to be so exhausted. It's risky. Slicing was done. Strict safety measures were relaxed. Completing the film within the allotted time was incredibly stressful. Since numerous risky exploits had already been planned, everyone thought the worst was over. Their assumption was completely incorrect. On top of that, the plot itself contributed to the satanic dreadfulness. The Crow story tells of a man who, after his death and that of his fiancée, returns to seek vengeance. An ominous gothic vision drenched in bloodshed and retribution, this was dark and bloody poetry. After death, Brandon's character, Eric Draven, comes back to life. Even after his real death, everyone would have seen the symbolism. For those who were privy to both realities, the bleak dream was the inspiration for the blending of lines. Production journalist Julianne Jerry of Entertainment Weekly described the eerily quiet atmosphere on site. She claimed that nothing ever appeared to work out. As filming progressed, a pervasive sense of unease intensified. Many were already anxious when Brandon was getting ready to film his last scenes. He reflected on how they had survived numerous near-death experiences. Shooting will wrap up in a week or 2, and then they will be able to relax. Unbeknownst to them, the greatest threat they would face was yet ahead. Nobody gave much thought to the scene that would ultimately claim Brandon's life. There was no need for a stunt double, and there were no explosions or fires either. All it took was Brandon entering a store with a bag of goods. After he takes a hit, the camera cuts away. Task completed. It turned out to be the most heartbreaking part of the entire show, even though no one saw it coming. Creating the film. After Brandon passed away, many started to think about what the Crow's fate would be from the beginning. They finally came out to inform us that he had passed away after we waited for what felt like hours. As if setting it up for failure long before gunfire erupted. Some others thought that the supernatural was involved. There were others who associated the events with the screenplay, a disturbing theme that permeated the discussion of violence and rebirth. When asked about Brandon's unusual connection to death, few brought up the fact that he had buried his father, Bruce Lee, under mysterious circumstances when he was just 8 years old. In keeping with this, one crew member has stated that he will only provide information while remaining anonymous. Claims that it was haunted have been made. Regarding it, I am uncertain. On the other hand, the atmosphere on set was rather negative. Unveiling the smoking gun's truth would expose something far more sinister than a curse. It was the gun that killed him. Investigators focused on one crucial topic once the immediate shock and sadness subsided. What gave a cinematic prop pistol a real bullet? It wasn't like a misfired bullet or an ill-planned stunt. The autopsy revealed that Brandon Lee had been shot in the abdomen by a full .44 caliber round, dispelling all hope that this was an accident. It had to have happened at some point in the chain of command, because someone had loaded that gun with a killing round. A genuine Smith & Wesson Model 629-44 Magnum handgun was utilized in the scene. Using actual firearms in film is a prevalent practice in the entertainment industry. In place of actual bullets, they are altered to discharge blanks, which, when fired, make a deafening boom and flash from the muzzle. However, a terrible event happened this time. Let me tell you what transpired. The same pistol had been used in a previous close-up scene shot by the team. They utilized fake rounds to make it look like the pistol was loaded, which added to the authenticity. Although they appear to be live bullets, these are actually designed to be totally harmless. Not a single powder. There is no introduction. For display only. However, a crucial error was committed by the props crew. The primer was left in the fake cartridges while they removed the gunpowder. Now, the primer is the part of a genuine bullet that sets the powder on fire, so the bullet may shoot. Primers still contain a modest explosive charge, even in their powdered form. During that earlier close-up, one of the dummy rounds was dry-fired. A squib load occurred when the primer went off just enough to dislodge the bullet from its casing and drive it into the gun's barrel. It went unnoticed. Afterwards, nobody bothered to examine the barrel. The bullet remained lodged in the gun's barrel, posing a lethal threat. After a few days, the barrel was prepared for Brandon's scene by removing fake cartridges and replacing them with blanks. The only components of a blank are primer and gunpowder. The projectile itself lacks a bullet. Rather than actually launching a bullet, they are engineered to mimic the sound and flashes of genuine gunfire for the sake of the film. Something heinous transpired, however, once the bullet became caught in the barrel and a blank lay behind it. Michael Massey deftly pulled the trigger, setting the blank on fire. The combination of gas and pressure from the explosion propelled the stuck bullet out of the barrel with the same force as a live cartridge. Nothing was indicated. Nothing was jammed. Brandon fell to the ground in the aftermath of a single, deafening gunshot and a blinding burst of light. It was too late by the time anyone could perceive correctly. A cascade of carelessness led to this rather than just an accident. It is expected that the firearm has been inspected. The fake rounds ought to have been made correctly. In particular, before to the use of any live pyrotechnics on set, the weapon should have been cleared by a professional armorer. And now we come to the most terrifying aspect. On that particular night, the set did not have a licensed weapons master in attendance. Instead, a prop assistant who was probably not qualified, was already worn out and weary when she handled a real gun, knowing full well the dangers it posed to her employment. Probably not. In any other country, this degree of carelessness would be considered illegal. They referred to it as a mistake in Hollywood. This chain of events leading up to Brandon's death was eventually confirmed by the official investigation. Many in the business, including Brandon's immediate family, felt the incident was more akin to criminal negligence, even though the report labeled it as an accident. A small slip-up, an unnoticed precautionary measure. Well, I've got it right here. Once again, we have been cursed. The reality that specific events occurred before to Brandon's accident, for example with the Crow. A promising career cut short in the span of 10 minutes by an unintentional bullet. Why, therefore, would some individuals begin rumor-mongering about sabotage if it was all simply carelessness? Never again will actual firearms be used, whether on screen or in any other medium. Upon further examination of the making of the Crow, a troubling trend becomes apparent, surpassing the scope of a singular unfortunate error. A tangled web of fatigue, misunderstandings, and riskily weak safety procedures led to Brandon Lee's demise. What transpired that evening was due to more than simply a technical glitch. It was the natural outcome of a film set that had been overworked. Both time and money were of the essence for the Crow. Not exactly a smash hit at the box office. In an effort to make every dollar count, it was a rough, mid-budget action flick. A sense of urgency to wrap quickly set up as the session continued. Costs meant risks, and delays meant costs. Consequently, standards were bent, shortcuts were taken, and responsibilities that should have been handled by experts were instead passed on to overworked staff members who had little space for error. Even on the night of Brandon's shooting, the film's armorer, the individual legally tasked with handling all weapons on set, was absent. Someone without any expertise in handgun safety has been assigned that task, a prop helper. They lacked the necessary training, certification, and understanding to clear and inspect a gun correctly. The same crew reportedly handled both real and fake rounds similarly, mingling them carelessly in earlier shots without properly segregating them. Armorer, assistant director, and actor are the three persons who, in theory, should verify that a firearm is safe before it is considered certified safe. The crow swung right past that entire line of command. No one checked the weapon before passing it to the actor, who then shot it. That night wasn't the only one when danger lurked. The entire vibe of the shoot was it. Members of the crew later testified that they worked 90 hours a week, 6 days a week, and 18-hour days. Fatigue like that is harmful in more ways than one. With all the stunts, explosives, and guns on set, it's quite risky. Things were no longer double-checked. Errors evolved into the norm. In the interest of punctuality, warnings were disregarded. No one was positive that the safety procedures were followed, according to an unidentified team member. It was preventable if handled differently. The studio naturally refuted the allegations. They maintained that everyone on set was a true expert and that working under such harsh conditions was par for the course. In private, even a few executives acknowledged that the timetable had been quite demanding. The stress of the shoot was getting to individuals. The most concerning aspect is the previous usage of fake rounds. The same ones who had the bullet lodged in its casing. In fact, they manufactured them on site. That wasn't put together by a professional manufacturer or checked by a ballistics expert, it was created by the effects team. It was as hastily assembled and improvised as everything else on set. Brandon Lee might still be alive today if someone hadn't rushed through checking that barrel, if the armorer hadn't been late, and if the crew hadn't been exhausted. These represented a systemic failing, not merely breakdowns. And in their aftermath was a stinging indictment of how safety may be abandoned for expediency, financial restraints, and procedure-naive faith. It is said that Hollywood is a place of illusions. However, the deception was ruined that evening. The death was caused by a genuine bullet. But there remained an unanswered question that could not be resolved by carelessness alone. For what reason did this ring so true to Bruce Lee's demise? A disturbing parallel inside the family. Everyone was shocked when they heard of Brandon Lee's death, not just those in Hollywood. It sent shockwaves through the martial arts community, popular culture, and, most disturbing of all, the memories of the other rising star whose father had met a similar fate 20 years before, Bruce Lee. We couldn't turn a blind eye to the striking resemblance. The same family has two actors. Death struck them both at an early age. Uncertainty surrounded both of them. They are both literally walking on the edge of fame. Both were interpreted in a manner that caused unending curiosity, distrust, and sadness. Similar to Brandon's death, Bruce Lee's 1973 passing was shrouded in mystery. Brain swelling, or cerebral edema, was officially determined to be the cause. Some of his relatives, however, continue to hold the belief that he was murdered. Many hypotheses were advanced, including hidden medical issues, allergic reactions, and, most persistently, vengeance from the Triads, a formidable criminal organization with extensive connections to the Hong Kong film industry. This hypothesis wasn't just made up, says martial arts instructor Ed Parker Jr., whose dad had instructed Bruce. He asserted that Bruce was a free spirit who dared to speak his mind and who would not submit to the established hierarchies of the Eastern film industry. According to my dad, there was really some kind of foul play. 20 years after Bruce Lee's character in Game of Death dies from a gunshot wound, Brandon Lee also dies on set in a similar situation. In that 1978 picture, Bruce plays a character who is an actor shooting a scenario with a gun. He has no idea that an assassin has loaded one of the fake firearms with a real bullet. It was during that scene that he was actually shot. There are uncanny similarities between this plot and Brandon's own downfall. Art imitating life, or more terrifyingly, life imitating art. Nobody missed that. Conspiracy theorists, fans, and journalists all took notice quickly. Just a coincidence? Like a tragic parody? Perhaps something far more sinister? Similarly, like his father, Brandon has a bright future ahead of him. Just like his father before him, he didn't do what his dad did. He was carrying on the family tradition. One of his breaks was said to have been The Crow. After appearing in supporting parts in low-budget action flicks for a while, this performance was his big break. Much of the filming for the film has already taken place. Eliza Hutton, his lifelong girlfriend, and he were set to get married. Like Bruce, his life was coming together just as he was about to see it shattered. After that, there would have been many in the family who would have begun to whisper softly about the idea that Brandon's death wasn't accidental. Nothing about the official version made sense. It is completely illogical to have a live bullet in that close proximity to that set. It was reasonable to assume foul play considering the family's past. Were the Lees being pursued by someone? Were there grudges that had been dormant since Bruce's reign? Or was it only that the unrelenting shadow of a father's terrible tragedy hung over his son's life? The terrible pattern is inextricable in a web of possible conspiracies or random coincidences. An unidentified man dies at the age of 32. 20 years down the road, at the age of 28, the son passes quickly. Both are obscured by uncertainty. The two of them have a common passion: movies. The timing of Brandon's death, which occurred only weeks before his wedding and just weeks before filming on The Crow was to conclude, added an extra layer of tragedy. From the timing to the approach to the symbolism, it seemed like there were too many indications to miss. There had to be a far deeper cover-up than anybody thought if Bruce and Brandon were both taken advantage of by someone more evil. The fallout. The production of The Crow ground to a halt after Brandon Lee's death. Everyone on set was overcome with sadness. Many people believed that the set had lost its professional air. I felt like I was in a cemetery. No sign of the lead actor. Tragically, the man who had devoted himself to this moody poetry part was now the one who was being portrayed in the film. The emotional aftermath caught everyone off guard. In the middle of it all was actor Michael Massey, who killed Brandon with an unintentional shot. His sudden vanishing from view from the public eye was striking. The event reportedly left him distraught, inconsolable, and tormented, according to his friends. Years later, when interviewed, Massey avoided discussing it extensively. Although he did so, the agony remained acute. That's just something I'm going to have to deal with. The time it took for me to not only put things in perspective, but also to go on with my life, was time well spent. He conceded that it's unlikely that one could ever move past such a tragedy. It permeates my existence. The Crow was never shown to him. The news went throughout Hollywood like wildfire. Firearms frightened directors, performers, stunt coordinators, and anybody else who had ever handled weapons on production. It wasn't only an unfortunate accident. A rude awakening ensued. However, concerns started to rise as the industry grieved. For what did the blame lie? In what ways could this have been avoided? Were there grounds to press charges? Immediate action was taken to initiate the official investigation. The night's events were pieced together when detectives analyzed the weapon, questioned the crew, and reviewed the footage. The .44 Magnum was originally loaded with a blank, but a trapped bullet from a poorly manufactured dummy round transformed it into a live round. It was easy to follow the order. Devastating was the outcome. However, a lot of people thought the tale was incomplete. The media started to probe more deeply. Speculation about possible foul play returned. Reporters drew a disturbing parallel to the scene where Bruce Lee's character takes a real bullet wound while filming Game of Death. Now, under almost the same conditions, Brandon had departed. After that, Eliza Hutton, who was engaged to Brandon, had to deal with the unfathomable situation. Just a few short weeks before she was to tie the knot with her soulmate, she was busy planning Brandon's funeral. She never granted a public interview following his death, despite being by his side in the hospital, clutching his hand as the medics struggled to save him. Less is more when it came to her quiet. Thousands upon thousands of fans showed up, with many paying a visit to the Seattle cemetery to pay their respects to Brandon and his father. Joined in life, bound in legacy, a profoundly moving symbolism. The Crow was on the verge of death. There was talk of the studio pulling the plug on the project completely. The decision to finish the film as an homage was decided after consulting Eliza and Brandon's mother. The production crew recreated Brandon's last work into a film using early video, doubles, and cutting-edge visual effects. It did more than simply play when it was ultimately published in 1994. It sparked a sensation. Many critics praised Brandon's performance. I couldn't separate the melancholy in the poetry from the lovely sound of it emanating. Unfortunately, Brandon Lee passes away while playing the role of the movie's protagonist, who subsequently haunts the slayers and criminals. However, some things were left unresolved, even though the film received numerous positive reviews and was a financial success. The imprint was held by the district attorney's office. Felonies not proven. Too many safety infractions had occurred, but there was no evidence of criminal intent. Just a tragic accident, they said. There were many for whom that was insufficient. Timeliness, the dummy rounds, the whereabouts of safety staff, and the apparent omission of this fundamental step, checking the barrel, remain open questions. On the other hand, the crew's publicist had challenged a potentially hazardous workplace. The crew's internal perspective was quite different. They were overwhelmed, overworked, and under stress. Whenever everyone thought things were finally getting better, a disturbing finding from the autopsy would reopen all the questions. Reason being, the contents of Brandon's body did not correspond with the set design. Almost hidden was the truth. One narrative persisted for months following Brandon Lee's death, which posited a terrible accident brought about by poorly handled props, an overworked crew, and a blank round that tragically reacted with a lodged bullet. This argument was reasonable enough to appease the studio, practical enough to keep legal action at a minimum, and intentionally nebulous enough to muddy the waters between blame and forgiveness. The official records, especially the autopsy, contained details that demanded further examination. I was taken aback by one particular aspect right away. Lee's body was subjected to the removal of a .44 caliber bullet. Investigators are moving on with their probe. The .44 caliber lead slug that was recovered from Brandon's corpse was completely undamaged. However, some crew members have stated that there were never intended to be any live rounds on site. What about flanks? Yes. Practice sessions? Yes. Actual bullets, loaded and containing powder? In no world. How, therefore, did a real bullet find its way into a toy gun's chamber? Based on earlier results, investigators initially thought the bullet had come loose from a dummy round that had a primer remnant. However, forensic specialists who examined the post-mortem report cast doubt on that account. Surprisingly, the bullet showed no signs of damage or pore seeding. It was clean and undamaged. Some started to wonder if it wasn't a factory-made round and not a modified dummy. Everything would be altered by that discovery. It would have been a blatant breach of film safety protocol to bring live ammunition to set if it had been a real bullet. It was still unusual and highly risky to use live bullets on set even in the early 90s. Official reports, however, never verified the identities of those involved in the dummy rounds production or handling. The records in question were either never filed or were either lost. On that fateful night, nobody could agree on who was responsible for loading the weapon. Worrying even more were rumblings from former employees who had worked on the Crow and had come up with alarming allegations in subsequent years. An ex-employee of the crew said that several prop bullets had been created haphazardly without oversight. To cut costs and save time, he said, the manufacturer has recycled and reused rounds, frequently placing actual and fake rounds in the same container. No one ever said whether the real rounds were taken out afterward, although another crew member claimed to have seen them brought in during earlier scenes that needed realistic-appearing on-screen ammunition. The next thing you knew, the idea that sabotage was still a possibility emerged. This wasn't some trivial tabloid rumor. The lead investigator, Detective J.J. Leitner, has stated that no possibility has been dismissed. Years later, in an interview, Leitner admitted that he had an intuition about the murky case but was unable to prove it. Accordingly, who might be acting out of self-interest? Some conspiracy theorists have even revived the concept of a grudge based on Bruce Lee's death, suggesting that competing studios, envious insiders, or even the surviving members of the Chinese syndicates that Bruce supposedly resisted could be plotting Brandon's demise for the same reasons. In a business where power, wealth, and prestige can breed animosity, some have hypothesized that Brandon's newfound prominence would provoke someone. A new layer of realism was added when Brandon died while acting out his father's made-up death. A live round unintentionally put into a gun kills Bruce Lee's role in Game of Death while filming. From the framing to the time to the devastating aftermath, it is nearly identical to what happened with Brandon in The Crow. Am I missing something here? Alternatively, was a genuine, deadly message being conveyed through fiction? No formal accusations were ever leveled. Nothing new came to light. The story became buried in Hollywood lore after a while. However, Brandon Lee's impact and the enigma surrounding his demise remained ever present. Ultimately, regardless of the numerous reports, speculations, and so-called answers that are included, there is a lingering doubt. Who loaded the rifle with that bullet? How come nobody intervened to stop them? The passing of Brandon Lee was more than an unfortunate Hollywood event. It echoed the anguish of a family history marred by secrecy, poor leadership, and unresolved issues. In your opinion, what transpired? Did someone intend for Brandon Lee's death, or was it an accident? Post a comment and tell us. Please like, subscribe, and view the next video in this series for more stunning genuine stories from Hollywood.